What if the person cleaning your floors held the keys to solving problems worth millions? What if behind that uniform and that quiet demeanor was someone who could navigate the complexities of international business better than your highest-paid consultants? For tech mogul Marcus Chen, discovering the truth about his housekeeper would transform not just his company, but everything he thought he knew about talent hiding in plain sight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The marble floors of the Chen estate gleamed under the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Silicon Valley's rolling hills. Every surface reflected perfection, from the polished granite countertops to the pristine white walls adorned with contemporary art worth more than most people's homes. It was a fortress of success, meticulously maintained and utterly sterile. In this palace of technology and wealth, Rosa Martinez moved like a ghost. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound against the Italian marble as she pushed her cart from room to room, each movement practiced and precise. She wore the standard gray uniform of prestige domestic services, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her presence so unobtrusive that she might as well have been invisible. Rosa had been cleaning the Chen mansion for 3 years, arriving every Tuesday and Friday at precisely 7 in the morning. She knew every corner of the sprawling estate, every preference of its owner, every hidden dust bunny that dared to disturb the perfection. She worked methodically, efficiently, and most importantly, silently. Marcus Chen, the 42-year-old founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics, barely acknowledged her existence. When their paths crossed in the vast house, he would offer a polite nod or a brief good morning before disappearing into his home office, his mind already consumed by the next technological breakthrough or business acquisition. To him, Rosa was simply part of the machinery that kept his life running smoothly, no more remarkable than the automated irrigation system that maintained his Japanese garden. What Marcus didn't know was that Rosa Martinez harbored secrets that would have shattered his assumptions about the quiet woman who dusted his awards and vacuumed his Persian rugs. Rosa's story began 28 years ago in a small village outside Bogota, Colombia, where her father taught literature at the local university and her mother worked as a translator for international aid organizations. The Martinez household was modest in material wealth but rich in intellectual curiosity. Books in multiple languages lined every wall, and dinner conversations flowed seamlessly between Spanish, English, French, and Portuguese. Rosa had been a linguistic prodigy from childhood, absorbing languages the way other children collected toys. By age 12, she was fluent in 5 languages and working as an unofficial interpreter for her mother's organization. Her parents recognized her extraordinary gift and made enormous sacrifices to send her to Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, where she excelled in international relations and linguistics. Her professors spoke of her as a once-in-a-generation talent. She could not only speak multiple languages fluently but understood the cultural nuances that transformed mere translation into true communication. She earned her bachelor's degree summa cum laude and was accepted into a prestigious master's program in international diplomacy at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Rosa had arrived in America with dreams as vast as the country itself. She envisioned a career at the United Nations, perhaps as a cultural attaché or international negotiator. Her thesis advisor at Georgetown called her work on cross-cultural business communication groundbreaking. She was fluent in Spanish, English, French, Portuguese, Italian, and Mandarin Chinese, with conversational abilities in German and Arabic. But dreams, Rosa learned, were fragile things. During her second year at Georgetown, her father suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to work. Her mother, trying to care for him while maintaining her own job, fell into deep depression. The family's small savings evaporated under the weight of medical bills and lost income. Rosa faced an impossible choice: continue her education while her family struggled, or return home to help them survive. The decision tore her apart, but it was never really a choice at all. She withdrew from Georgetown, leaving behind her thesis defense, her academic future, and her diplomatic dreams. She used her savings to buy a plane ticket back to Bogota, where she spent 2 years nursing her father back to limited independence and helping her mother rebuild their fractured lives. When her father's condition stabilized, Rosa realized she needed to earn money to support the family's ongoing medical expenses. Her Georgetown education, incomplete though it was, had left her with significant student debt that followed her even back to Columbia. She applied for translator positions with international organizations, but the economic downturn had made such positions scarce and highly competitive. A family friend mentioned that domestic service agencies in the United States paid well for workers with language skills, particularly for affluent clients who entertained international guests. The pay was enough to support her family and slowly chip away at her debt. Rosa swallowed her pride and applied. Prestige Domestic Services was impressed by her references and language abilities. They placed her with several high-profile clients in the San Francisco Bay Area, eventually settling her into a regular schedule with the Chen estate. The work was honest and the pay was decent, but every day felt like a small death of the person she used to be. Rosa had been cleaning Marcus Chen's house for 3 years without him knowing that his housekeeper spoke 6 languages fluently, held an incomplete but impressive graduate degree in international relations, and had once been considered one of the most promising diplomatic minds of her generation. To him, she was simply Rosa, the efficient cleaning lady who kept his world spotless. This Tuesday morning started like every other. Rosa arrived at 7 sharp, nodded to the security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper, and used her keycard to enter through the service entrance. She began her routine in the kitchen, wiping down surfaces that were already pristine and organizing a pantry that was meticulously maintained. Marcus was in his home office, as usual, engaged in a heated video conference with his executive team. Through the glass walls of his office, Rosa could see him gesturing emphatically at his multiple monitors, his dark hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. Quantum Dynamics was in the middle of a critical expansion into the Asian markets, and the stress was evident in the tense set of his shoulders. Rosa moved through the house like a specter, dusting furniture and straightening items that were already perfectly arranged. She had learned to navigate around Marcus's work schedule, timing her cleaning of his office for when he took his afternoon runs through the hills behind his house. It was while she was cleaning the guest bathroom on the 2nd floor that she first heard the shouting. Marcus's voice, usually controlled and measured, was raised in frustration. Rosa could hear him clearly through the ventilation system that connected the upper floors. He was speaking rapidly in English, his words sharp with anger. "This is unacceptable," he was saying to someone on the phone. "We've been working on this Shanghai deal for 8 months, and now you're telling me it's falling apart because of cultural miscommunication? I'm paying your firm 7 figures to handle international acquisitions, and you can't figure out how to talk to Chinese executives?" Rosa paused in her cleaning, her hand frozen on the marble countertop. She shouldn't be listening, but something about the conversation drew her attention. "What do you mean they're offended?" Marcus continued. "We followed every protocol your team outlined." The presentation was translated professionally. "We offered terms that are more than generous." There was a long pause as Marcus listened to the response. Rosa could practically feel his frustration radiating through the house. "Cultural nuances," Marcus repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right. Nuances that are apparently so subtle that your team of international business experts completely missed them. Do you have any idea how much money we've invested in this expansion? How much is riding on these partnerships?" Another pause. Rosa found herself unconsciously holding her breath. "Fine," Marcus said finally. "Set up another meeting. But I want a different team handling this. Your current people clearly don't understand what they're dealing with." The conversation ended abruptly, and Rosa heard the unmistakable sound of Marcus slamming his phone down on his desk. She quickly resumed her cleaning, but her mind was racing. From the fragments she had overheard, it sounded like Quantum Dynamics was struggling with a critical business deal in China, hampered by cultural misunderstandings that were costing them millions. Rosa had encountered similar situations during her time in graduate school and her mother's work with international organizations. Cultural miscommunication in business wasn't just about language barriers, it was about understanding the deeper social codes, the unspoken expectations, the subtle ways that respect and relationship building functioned in different societies. She finished the bathroom and moved on to the master bedroom, but her thoughts remained focused on Marcus's conversation. She knew from overhearing his various calls over the years that Quantum Dynamics specialized in quantum computing technology with applications in financial modeling and encryption. The Chinese market represented a massive opportunity for expansion, but it was also notoriously difficult for Western companies to navigate successfully. As Rosa worked, she found herself mentally analyzing what she had heard. The fact that Marcus mentioned professional translations suggested they had covered the basic language requirements. The reference to generous terms indicated they were offering competitive financial arrangements. But if Chinese executives were still resistant, the issue was likely deeper than language or money. In Chinese business culture, Rosa knew, relationships were paramount. Trust was built over time through personal connections and demonstrated respect for hierarchy and tradition. Many Western companies failed in China not because their products were inferior or their terms ungenerous, but because they approached business relationships with an American directness that could be perceived as disrespectful or presumptuous. Rosa had studied these dynamics extensively during her graduate work, analyzing case studies of successful and failed international business ventures. She had written a paper on cross-cultural communication and technology transfers that her professor had praised as insightful beyond her years. But that was another life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now she was just the cleaning lady, invisible and irrelevant to the high-stakes world of international business. Rosa spent the rest of the morning working mechanically, but her mind kept drifting back to Marcus's phone conversation. She found herself imagining what she might advise if someone asked for her input on the Chinese market expansion. The strategies she would recommend, the cultural considerations she would emphasize, the relationship-building approaches that might bridge the gap between American efficiency and Chinese relationship dynamics. It was a futile exercise, she told herself. She was indulging in fantasies about a career she had abandoned years ago. Chen had no idea that his housekeeper possessed any knowledge beyond cleaning supplies and vacuum maintenance. Even if he did, why would a successful tech CEO listen to advice from someone who cleaned his toilets? Around noon, Rosa was dusting the living room when she heard the front door open. Marcus emerged from his office to greet someone, and Rosa quickly moved to make herself even more invisible, focusing intently on a bookshelf in the corner. "David, thanks for coming over," Marcus said, shaking hands with a tall man in an expensive suit. "I know this is short notice, but we need to talk about the Shanghai situation." David Hamilton was Marcus's head of international development, a Harvard MBA with decades of experience in global markets. Rosa had seen him at the house several times for informal strategy sessions. He had the polished confidence of someone accustomed to closing million-dollar deals. "It's a disaster, Marcus," David said as they settled into the leather chairs near the fireplace. "Chen International is pulling out entirely. They're saying our approach was culturally insensitive, but they won't specify what we did wrong. 8 months of work down the drain." Rosa continued dusting, moving slowly to avoid drawing attention while straining to hear the conversation. "What exactly did we do that was so offensive?" Marcus asked. "We followed every piece of advice your consultants gave us." David sighed heavily. "That's just it, nobody seems to know. The feedback we're getting is vague. They're talking about face and respect and proper protocols, but when we ask for specifics, they just say we wouldn't understand." "Well, we better figure out how to understand," Marcus said, his voice tense. "The Chinese market represents 40% of our projected growth over the next 5 years. If we can't crack this, we're going to have to completely restructure our expansion plans." Rosa's hand stilled on the bookshelf. She knew exactly what had gone wrong, could see the cultural landmines that Marcus's team had likely stumbled into without realizing it. The dismissive attitude David was displaying right now, the assumption that Chinese business concerns were somehow mysterious or irrational, was probably part of the problem. "Maybe we need to bring in different consultants," David suggested. "Someone with deeper China experience." "We've already burned through 3 consulting firms," Marcus replied. Each one promised they understood the Chinese market, and each one failed to deliver. I'm starting to think this is an impossible puzzle. Rosa felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same feeling she got whenever she encountered a problem she knew she could solve but was powerless to address. It was like watching someone struggle with a locked door while you held the key but couldn't make yourself visible enough to help. The worst part, David continued, is that Chen International seemed genuinely interested in our technology. Their technical team was impressed with our quantum encryption capabilities. But somewhere between the technical discussions and the business negotiations, everything fell apart. What about the Taiwan operation? Marcus asked. Are they having similar issues? No, actually. The Taiwanese partnership is moving forward smoothly. But Taiwan is different, more westernized, more similar to our usual business approach. Rosa almost snorted at David's oversimplification. Taiwan wasn't more westernized in the way he meant. It was simply a different cultural context with different expectations and relationship dynamics. The same strategies that worked in Taipei could fail spectacularly in Shanghai if applied without proper cultural adaptation. I'm supposed to fly to Beijing next week for a last-ditch meeting with Chen International's board, Marcus said. But honestly, David, I don't see the point. If we can't figure out what went wrong the first time, we're just going to repeat the same mistakes. Maybe you should cancel, David suggested. Cut our losses and focus on markets we understand better. Rosa's hands clenched around her dusting cloth. The casual dismissal of an entire market because of cultural incompetence made her want to scream. These were brilliant men when it came to technology and business strategy, but they were approaching international expansion with the cultural sensitivity of tourists complaining that foreign countries weren't exactly like home. I hate to give up, Marcus said, but you might be right. We're throwing good money after bad at this point. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering various aspects of quantum dynamics international strategy. Rosa listened to David's analysis of European markets, his dismissive comments about developing world bureaucracy, and his repeated suggestions that they focus on markets where people think like we do. When David finally left, Rosa continued her work in silence. She finished the living room, cleaned the guest bathroom, and was preparing to start on Marcus's office when she heard his phone ring again. Chen here, he answered, his voice weary. Rosa was dusting just outside his office door, close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. Marcus, it's Jennifer Zhao from Chen International, came a woman's voice through the speaker. I wanted to call personally to express our regret about how things have developed. Rosa's breath caught. Jennifer Zhao was the daughter of Chen International's founder and one of the most respected businesswomen in Shanghai. Rosa had read about her in business journals during her graduate studies. Jennifer, I appreciate the call, Marcus replied. But I have to admit, I'm confused about what went wrong. We thought we were showing proper respect for your company and your culture. Marcus, I hope you understand that this was not a decision we made lightly. Your technology is impressive, and we were genuinely excited about the potential partnership. Then help me understand what happened, Marcus said. My team is telling me it was cultural miscommunication, but no one can explain what we did wrong. There was a long pause before Jennifer responded. Marcus, may I speak frankly? Please do. Your negotiation team approached our partnership as if they were acquiring a struggling startup rather than partnering with an established family business. The language your lawyers used, the assumptions about decision-making processes, the timeline pressures, everything suggested that you saw us as subordinates rather than equals. Rosa nodded unconsciously. This was exactly the kind of cultural blindness she had expected. But we offered very generous terms, Marcus protested. We were prepared to give you significant market share and favorable revenue splits. Marcus, this isn't about money, Jennifer said gently. It's about respect. When your team assumed that financial incentives would override our concerns about corporate culture integration, when they dismissed our questions about long-term family business considerations as emotional rather than rational, when they consistently interrupted our senior advisors during presentations, these things matter in China. Rosa could practically see Marcus's confusion through the glass wall of his office. He was a good man, she knew from observing him over the years, but he was trapped in his own cultural perspective. "I honestly didn't realize," Marcus said. "Our consultants assure us they understood Chinese business culture." "Your consultants understood Chinese business culture the way someone who has read about swimming understands water," Jennifer replied. "There's a difference between knowing facts and understanding context." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jennifer explaining some of the specific cultural missteps that had damaged the relationship. She was gracious but firm, making it clear that while she personally liked Marcus, the partnership was no longer viable given the way it had been handled. When the call ended, Rosa heard Marcus sit heavily in his chair. She could see him through the glass wall, his head in his hands, the weight of failure evident in his posture. Rosa finished her dusting and was preparing to move to another part of the house when Marcus's phone rang again. This time it was his assistant calling to confirm his travel arrangements for Beijing. "Cancel it," Marcus said flatly. "Cancel the whole trip. There's no point." "Sir, are you sure?" his assistant asked. "The meetings are already scheduled." "I'm sure. We're done with the China expansion. Focus our resources on markets where we can actually succeed." Rosa felt a surge of frustration so intense it took her breath away. Marcus was giving up on a massive opportunity because he didn't understand the cultural landscape he was trying to navigate. Meanwhile, she was standing 15 feet away from him, invisible and silent, with years of specialized training in exactly the kind of cross-cultural communication challenges he was facing. She finished her work mechanically, her mind churning with frustration and regret. As she prepared to leave for the day, she passed by Marcus's office one more time. He was still sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen but clearly not seeing it. For just a moment, Rosa allowed herself to imagine walking into that office and offering her help. She pictured the look of surprise on Marcus's face, the disbelief when she explained her background, the skepticism that would follow when he processed that his housekeeper was offering business advice. But the fantasy faded quickly. Even if Marcus were open to listening, which was unlikely, what could she really offer? She was 3 years removed from her academic work, completely disconnected from the business world. Her knowledge was theoretical, untested in real corporate environments. No, she was being foolish. She was the cleaning lady, and that was all she would ever be in this house. Marcus Chen would fly to Beijing or cancel his trip, would succeed or fail in his expansion plans, and Rosa Martinez would continue to dust his furniture and vacuum his floors, invisible and irrelevant. She gathered her supplies and left through the service entrance, just as she had every Tuesday and Friday for 3 years. Tomorrow she would return to her small apartment in San Jose, where she would send half her paycheck to her parents in Colombia and spend her evening helping her neighbors' children with their homework in 3 different languages. But as she drove through the winding roads that led away from the Chen estate, Rosa couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. She had spent 3 years being invisible, but today, for the first time, she had truly seen the world that existed just beyond her reach. And perhaps, just perhaps, that world was about to see her too. Rosa stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her cramped San Jose apartment, watching water droplets fall from her face onto the chipped porcelain sink. It was Thursday evening, 2 days since she had overheard Marcus Chen's devastating phone calls about the failed Chinese expansion. Sleep had eluded her both nights, her mind replaying every word of those conversations with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The small apartment felt even more suffocating than usual. The walls seemed to press in on her as she moved through the familiar routine of preparing dinner from whatever remained in her nearly empty refrigerator. She had been living this way for 3 years, counting every dollar, sending money home to Colombia while trying to pay down her student loans, existing in a liminal space between her past achievements and present circumstances. But something had shifted inside her during those overheard conversations. A dormant part of her consciousness had awakened, the part that had once analyzed international business cases with professors who called her brilliant, the part that had written research papers on cross-cultural communication that her advisors said could reshape how American companies approached global markets. She heated leftover rice and beans while mentally drafting the presentation she would never give, outlining the cultural framework Marcus needed to understand Chinese business relationships. Her mind moved with a clarity and speed she hadn't experienced in years, connecting dots between Confucian hierarchy principles and modern Chinese corporate structure, between the concept of guanxi and practical negotiation strategies. The irony was suffocating. She possessed exactly the expertise Marcus desperately needed, yet the gulf between their worlds made her knowledge as useful as a treasure map written in invisible ink. Rosa's phone buzzed with a text from her mother in Bogota, asking how she was doing and whether she was eating enough. The message was in Spanish, but Rosa found herself composing her response in Mandarin, then switching to Portuguese, then back to Spanish. Her brain was cycling through languages like a computer searching for the right algorithm to solve an impossible equation. She picked at her simple dinner while scrolling through news articles about quantum dynamics on her laptop. The company's stock had dropped 3% since rumors began circulating about their stalled Asian expansion. Business analysts were questioning Marcus's strategic vision, suggesting that his success in domestic markets hadn't prepared him for the complexities of international growth. The articles made Rosa's chest tighten with frustration. These analysts understood nothing about the real issues facing quantum dynamics. They wrote about market conditions and competitive pressures without grasping the fundamental cultural disconnects that were sabotaging Marcus's efforts. She closed the laptop and walked to her bedroom window, looking out at the lights of Silicon Valley sprawling below. Somewhere in those hills, Marcus was probably still working late in his pristine home office, wrestling with problems that seemed insurmountable to him but were clearly solvable to her. That night, Rosa dreamed she was back in her Georgetown classroom, presenting her thesis to a panel of professors who nodded approvingly as she explained the intricate dynamics of international business relationships. She woke at dawn with the taste of possibility sharp on her tongue and a dangerous idea crystallizing in her mind. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Rosa drove through the winding roads to the Chen estate with her heart hammering against her ribs. She had barely slept, spending the early morning hours researching current developments in quantum dynamics' Chinese expansion efforts and refreshing her knowledge of recent changes in Chinese business regulations. The security guard waved her through with his usual indifferent nod. Rosa parked in the service area and sat in her car for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel as she battled with herself. What she was contemplating went against every survival instinct she had developed over the past 3 years. She had learned to be invisible, to avoid drawing attention, to accept her role without question. But the memory of Marcus's defeated voice when he canceled his Beijing trip would not leave her alone. Rosa entered the house through the service entrance and began her routine, but her movements felt mechanical, disconnected from her churning thoughts. She cleaned the kitchen with unusual slowness, listening for sounds from Marcus's office. The house felt different today, charged with an energy she couldn't identify. Around 10 o'clock, she heard Marcus on another phone call, this one with his board of directors. Even from the kitchen, she could hear the tension in his voice as he explained the failure of the Chinese expansion and outlined alternative growth strategies. The conversation was stilted, formal, filled with corporate speak that barely concealed the underlying disappointment and frustration. "We're redirecting our international focus toward European markets," Marcus was saying. "Germany and Switzerland show more promise for our quantum encryption technology, and the cultural barriers are more manageable." Rosa bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. European markets were already saturated with quantum computing companies. The real opportunity was in Asia, where technological infrastructure was rapidly expanding and governments were investing heavily in advanced encryption capabilities. She finished the kitchen and moved upstairs, cleaning bathrooms and dusting furniture while her internal debate raged. Part of her mind was constructing detailed arguments for why she should speak up, while another part catalogued all the ways this could go disastrously wrong. What if Marcus thought she was delusional or presumptuous? What if he questioned her motives, wondered if she was some kind of corporate spy? What if he simply fired her and reported her behavior to Prestige Domestic Services, ending her employment entirely? But what if he listened? What if her knowledge could genuinely help him salvage the Chinese expansion? What if this moment was the universe offering her a chance to use her education for something meaningful again? Rosa was dusting the guest bedroom when she heard the front door open. David Hamilton's voice echoed through the house as he greeted Marcus, and Rosa felt her pulse quicken. She had heard enough of their previous conversations to know that David's presence usually meant important strategic discussions. She worked her way closer to the living room, positioning herself to clean the adjacent dining room where she could overhear their conversation without being obvious about it. The board meeting was brutal, Marcus was saying as they settled into their usual chairs. Shareholders are losing confidence in our international strategy. Thompson suggested we stick to domestic markets until we can figure out how to work with foreign partners. Maybe that's not such a bad idea, David replied. We've burned through millions on these failed expansion attempts. The European markets are more predictable. Predictable and saturated, Marcus countered. David, we both know that quantum encryption technology needs global adoption to reach its full potential. If we retreat to domestic markets, we're essentially capping our growth ceiling. Rosa's hands stilled on the mahogany table she was polishing. This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that would serve Marcus well in Chinese negotiations, but he needed to understand how to communicate it within a cultural framework that prioritized long-term relationship building over immediate market penetration. What about bringing in a completely different consulting firm? David suggested. Someone with proven success in Asian markets? We've tried 3 different firms, Marcus said wearily. Each one promised they understood Chinese business culture, and each one failed to deliver. I'm starting to think the problem isn't the consultants. Maybe there's something fundamentally incompatible between our business model and Chinese corporate culture. Rosa wanted to scream. The problem wasn't incompatibility. The problem was that Marcus's team kept approaching Chinese business relationships like they were negotiating Silicon Valley partnerships, focusing on technology specifications and financial terms while ignoring the relationship dynamics that actually drove decision-making in Chinese corporations. The Chen International deal was supposed to be our flagship partnership, Marcus continued. If we could have made that work, it would have opened doors throughout Asia. Now we're back to square one. Maybe we should consider a joint venture approach instead of direct partnerships, David suggested. Find a Chinese company that needs our technology and let them handle the cultural aspects. Rosa nearly dropped her dusting cloth. A joint venture would be the worst possible approach for quantum dynamics. It would require them to share proprietary technology while giving up control over implementation and market positioning. Marcus would be trading his competitive advantages for the illusion of cultural compatibility. The conversation continued for another hour, covering various aspects of international expansion strategy. Rosa listened with growing frustration as David outlined plans that demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how Asian business relationships functioned. His suggestions were grounded in outdated stereotypes and superficial cultural observations that would likely make future partnerships even more difficult. When David finally left, Rosa continued her work in a state of internal turmoil. She cleaned Marcus's office while he was on his afternoon run, organizing papers and files with the same meticulous care she had shown for 3 years. But today, she found herself reading document headers and email subject lines, her mind automatically processing the business information she encountered. One folder contained correspondence with Chen International, including Jennifer Zhao's formal letter declining the partnership. Rosa read the letter carefully, noting the diplomatic language that masked deeper criticisms of quantum dynamics' negotiation approach. Between the lines, she could see Jennifer's genuine disappointment that the partnership hadn't worked out. Another folder held reports from the various consulting firms Marcus had hired. Rosa skimmed through their analyses and recommendations, her academic training allowing her to quickly identify the gaps and misconceptions in their cultural assessments. These consultants understood Chinese business practices the way tourists understood foreign countries they glimpsed from bus windows. As Rosa cleaned and organized, she found herself mentally drafting a comprehensive cultural strategy document. Her mind moved through the key concepts Marcus needed to understand: the importance of personal relationships in Chinese business culture, the role of hierarchy and respect in decision-making processes, the way that time investment in relationship building directly correlated with long-term business success. She thought about the specific missteps his team had likely made during their negotiations with Chen International. The rushed timelines that would have been perceived as disrespectful, the legal language that probably suggested distrust rather than partnership, the focus on financial terms before establishing personal connections. By the time Rosa finished cleaning Marcus's office, she had constructed a detailed mental framework for how quantum dynamics could successfully reapproach the Chinese market. She knew exactly what Marcus needed to do differently, precisely how he should restructure his negotiation strategy, and specifically which cultural principles he needed to prioritize. The knowledge felt like a physical weight in her chest, a pressure that grew stronger with each passing hour. Rosa was preparing to leave for the day when she heard Marcus return from his run. He went directly to his office, and she could hear him making phone calls, his voice carrying the same defeated tone she had noticed over the past few days. She gathered her cleaning supplies and began loading her cart, but her movements were slow and reluctant. Every instinct told her to leave quietly, to maintain the invisible status that had protected her for 3 years. But another voice, growing stronger by the minute, urged her to find the courage to speak. As she wheeled her cart toward the service entrance, Rosa passed by Marcus's office one more time. Through the glass wall, she could see him sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen with the expression of someone who had run out of options. Rosa stopped walking. She stood in the hallway for several long moments, her internal debate reaching a crescendo. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons why she should remain silent, the risk to her employment, the likelihood that Marcus would dismiss her input, the potential embarrassment of overstepping her role. But the other voice, the one that sounded like her graduate school professors and her younger self, was stronger now. It reminded her that she had spent years developing expertise that could genuinely solve Marcus's problems. It whispered that some opportunities only came once in a lifetime, that courage was worthless if it was never used. Rosa took a deep breath and knocked on the glass door of Marcus's office. He looked up, surprised to see her standing there. For 3 years, their interactions had been limited to brief greetings and polite acknowledgments. She had never initiated a conversation, never lingered in his presence longer than necessary. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Chen," Rosa said, her voice steadier than she had expected. "But I couldn't help overhearing some of your phone conversations over the past few days, and I think I might be able to help with your Chinese expansion challenges." Marcus blinked, clearly taken aback by her unexpected statement. He set down his pen and gave her his full attention, though his expression was more puzzled than interested. "I appreciate the thought, Rosa," he said carefully, "but these are complex international business issues. I'm not sure how." "I have a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown University," Rosa interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I specialized in cross-cultural business communication, particularly between Western and Asian corporations. I speak Mandarin fluently, along with 5 other languages, and I've studied Chinese business culture extensively." The silence that followed felt endless. Marcus stared at her with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if she had suddenly revealed that she was an alien from another planet. "You have a master's degree?" he asked slowly. "Almost," Rosa said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I had to leave Georgetown before completing my thesis defense because of a family emergency. But I completed all my coursework and research. My thesis was on cultural miscommunication and international technology partnerships." Marcus continued to stare at her, processing this information. Rosa could practically see his mental gears turning as he tried to reconcile the woman who had cleaned his house for 3 years with the academic credentials she was claiming. "Rosa," he said finally, "why are you working as a housekeeper if you have this background?" The question she had dreaded. Rosa felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to answer honestly. "I needed to support my family in Colombia after my father had a stroke," she said. "The domestic service agency paid well for workers with language skills, and I had student loans to pay off. It was supposed to be temporary, but 3 years turned into a lifestyle." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from bewilderment to something that might have been recognition. For the first time in 3 years, he was really seeing her instead of looking through her. "You've been listening to my business calls," he said, though his tone wasn't accusatory. "Not intentionally at first," Rosa admitted. "But when I realized you were struggling with exactly the kind of cultural communication issues I studied at Georgetown, I couldn't help but pay attention. Mr. Chen, the problems you're having with Chinese partnerships aren't about language barriers or financial terms. They're about relationship dynamics and cultural expectations that your consulting firms don't understand." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made Rosa feel exposed and vulnerable. "What would you do differently?" he asked finally. The question opened a floodgate. Rosa found herself explaining the fundamental principles of Chinese business relationships, the importance of personal connection before professional negotiation, the role of respect and hierarchy in decision-making processes. She talked about the specific cultural missteps that had likely sabotaged his partnership with Chen International and outlined a comprehensive strategy for rebuilding those relationships. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more focused and engaged with each point Rosa made. She could see him mentally connecting her explanations to his recent experiences, understanding for the first time why his carefully planned negotiations had failed so spectacularly. "The consulting firms you hired approached Chinese business culture like anthropologists studying an extinct civilization," Rosa said, her confidence growing as she spoke. "They gave you facts and protocols without understanding the living, breathing reality of how relationships function in Chinese corporations. When your team focused on contract terms before establishing personal trust, when they rushed timelines without allowing for relationship building, when they dismissed cultural concerns as emotional rather than rational, they were essentially telling Chinese executives that their values and traditions didn't matter." "But we offered generous financial terms," Marcus protested. "We were prepared to give Chen International significant market share and favorable revenue splits." "Mr. Chen," Rosa said gently, "imagine if someone approached you about a business partnership and immediately started talking about how much money they were willing to give you, without first taking time to understand your company's values, your long-term goals, or your concerns about corporate culture integration. Would you trust them with your most important business relationships?" Marcus was quiet for several seconds, clearly processing her analogy. "I never thought about it that way," he admitted. "Chinese business culture prioritizes relationship building in a way that American business culture often finds inefficient," Rosa continued. "But it's not inefficient if you understand its purpose. When Chinese executives invest time in getting to know their potential partners personally, when they discuss family and shared values before talking about contracts, they're building the foundation for long-term business relationships that can survive market fluctuations and competitive pressures." "So you're saying we moved too fast," Marcus said. "You moved in the wrong order," Rosa corrected. "Speed isn't necessarily the issue. But you tried to build a house starting with the roof instead of the foundation." Marcus leaned forward, his interest clearly genuine now. "What would you recommend?" "Specifically, I mean. If you were advising my team, what would you tell them to do differently?" Rosa felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. This was the moment she had been unconsciously preparing for during all those sleepless nights, but the reality of Marcus actually asking for her advice was almost overwhelming. "First, you need to understand that your previous approach has already damaged your reputation in the Chinese business community," she said. "Jennifer Zhao from Chen International probably discussed your negotiations with other executives. If you want to re-enter the Chinese market, you'll need to rebuild your credibility from the ground up." "How do we do that?" "You start by acknowledging your mistakes publicly and demonstrating that you've learned from them," Rosa said. "Not in a press release or corporate statement, but through personal outreach to the executives you've worked with before. You take responsibility for the cultural miscommunication and ask for guidance on how to do better." Marcus looked skeptical. "That sounds like admitting weakness to potential competitors." "In American business culture, yes," Rosa agreed. "In Chinese business culture, it demonstrates wisdom and respect. The ability to acknowledge mistakes and seek guidance is seen as a strength, not a weakness. It shows that you value relationships more than ego." She could see Marcus struggling with this concept, his Silicon Valley instincts warring with the cultural framework she was describing. The second step, Rosa continued, is to completely restructure your approach to relationship building. Instead of sending teams of lawyers and consultants to negotiate contracts, you need to invest time in personal connections. Attend industry conferences in China, not to pitch your technology but to listen and learn. Invite Chinese executives to visit your facilities here, not for formal presentations but for informal conversations about shared challenges and goals. That sounds like it would take months, Marcus said. It will take months, Rosa confirmed. Maybe even a year or more to properly rebuild your reputation and establish the relationships you need for successful partnerships. But Chinese business relationships, once established, tend to be much more stable and long-lasting than typical American partnerships. You're not just looking for a contract, you're looking for business allies who will support your expansion over decades. Marcus was taking notes now, scribbling quickly as Rosa spoke. She could see his mind working, connecting her cultural explanations to practical business strategies. What about the specific issues with Chen International? He asked. Is that relationship salvageable? Rosa considered the question carefully. Possibly, but it would require a complete reset. You would need to approach Jennifer Zhao personally, not through intermediaries, and acknowledge specifically how your team's approach was culturally insensitive. You would need to demonstrate genuine understanding of what went wrong and ask for another opportunity to do better. And you think she would be open to that? I think Jennifer Zhao is a pragmatic businesswoman who is genuinely interested in your technology, Rosa said. If you can convince her that you understand why the first partnership attempt failed, and if you can demonstrate that you're committed to doing things differently, she might be willing to give you another chance. Marcus set down his pen and looked at Rosa directly. You really think you could help us navigate these cultural challenges? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them was quite ready to address directly. I think I understand the cultural dynamics you're dealing with better than the consulting firms you've been hiring, Rosa said carefully. And I think your technology has enormous potential in Asian markets if it's presented within the right cultural framework. Marcus was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with a decision that would have seemed impossible just an hour earlier. Rosa, he said finally, would you be willing to help me draft a letter to Jennifer Zhao? Something that acknowledges our cultural missteps and asks for guidance on how to do better. Rosa felt her heart skip a beat. You want me to help you write to Chen International? I want you to help me understand how to communicate with them in a way that shows respect for their culture and genuine interest in partnership, Marcus said. If you're right about the cultural issues being at the root of our problems, then I need someone who understands both sides to help me bridge that gap. Rosa nodded, trying to keep her expression calm despite the excitement coursing through her veins. I would be happy to help with that. Good, Marcus said, turning to his computer. Let's start now. For the next 2 hours, Rosa found herself doing something she hadn't done in 3 years, using her education and expertise to solve complex international business problems. She helped Marcus craft a letter to Jennifer Zhao that struck exactly the right tone of respectful acknowledgement and genuine interest in learning from past mistakes. They worked side by side, Marcus at his computer and Rosa in the chair beside his desk, collaborating on language that would resonate with Chinese business sensibilities while accurately representing quantum dynamics goals and values. Rosa found herself switching between English and Mandarin as she explained nuances of meaning and cultural connotation, helping Marcus understand not just what to say but why certain phrases would be more effective than others. The letter they produced was unlike any business correspondence Marcus had ever written. Instead of leading with quantum dynamics achievements and capabilities, it began with acknowledgement of the cultural miscommunication that had derailed their previous partnership discussions. Instead of focusing on financial terms and market opportunities, it emphasized shared values and long-term relationship building. This feels completely different from how I usually approach business communication, Marcus said as they reviewed the final draft. It should, Rosa replied. You're not trying to close a deal or demonstrate dominance. You're trying to rebuild trust and establish the foundation for genuine partnership. Marcus read through the letter one more time, then looked at Rosa with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Rosa, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Rosa felt her pulse quicken. Of course. Why did you decide to speak up today? You've been working here for 3 years, and you've never mentioned your educational background or business expertise. What changed? Rosa took a deep breath, considering how to answer honestly without revealing the full extent of her frustration and unfulfilled ambition. I listened to you struggle with problems that I knew I could help solve, she said finally. I watched you give up on opportunities that could transform your company because you didn't have access to the cultural knowledge you needed. At some point, staying silent stopped feeling like discretion and started feeling like cowardice. Marcus nodded slowly. And you're not concerned about how this might change your employment situation? The question Rosa had been dreading. She met his gaze directly. Mr. Chen, I've spent 3 years being invisible in your house, cleaning around the edges of a life and career that I used to think I could have myself. If speaking up today costs me this job, at least I'll know I tried to use my education for something meaningful. Marcus was quiet for several moments, and Rosa could see him processing not just her words but the larger implications of their conversation. Send the letter, he said finally. Rosa felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. Are you sure? I'm sure that what we've been doing hasn't worked, Marcus said. I'm sure that your cultural analysis makes more sense than anything I've heard from my consulting firms. And I'm sure that if Jennifer Zhao responds positively to this letter, I'm going to need your help with whatever comes next. The implication in his last statement made Rosa's breath catch. He wasn't just asking for help with a single letter. He was suggesting a much larger role in quantum dynamics' international expansion efforts. Marcus clicked send on the email, and Rosa watched the letter disappear into cyberspace, carrying with it the possibility of redemption for both quantum dynamics' Chinese expansion and her own abandoned career. Now what? Rosa asked. Now we wait, Marcus said. And while we're waiting, you and I need to have a much longer conversation about your background, your goals, and what role you might want to play in this company if Jennifer Zhao gives us another chance. Rosa felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. For 3 years, she had been invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. Now, in the span of a single afternoon, she had gone from housekeeper to consultant, from invisible to indispensable. The transformation felt surreal, like waking up from a dream she hadn't realized she was having. But as she looked at Marcus, who was already pulling up files related to quantum dynamics' international expansion strategy, Rosa realized that this wasn't a dream. This was the beginning of everything she had thought she had lost forever. The response from Jennifer Zhao arrived at 6:37 in the morning, exactly 18 hours after Marcus and Rosa had sent their carefully crafted letter. Rosa was already awake in her San Jose apartment, sipping coffee and staring at her phone, when Marcus called with barely contained excitement in his voice. She responded, he said without preamble. Rosa, Jennifer Zhao responded, and I think you need to see this immediately. Can you come in early today? Rosa's heart hammered as she drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the Chen estate. The weekend had passed in a blur of nervous energy and cautious hope. She had spent Saturday researching recent developments in Chinese technology policy and Sunday reviewing her old Georgetown notes on international business negotiations, preparing for possibilities she barely dared to imagine. The security guard looked surprised to see her arriving at 7 in the morning instead of her usual 9 o'clock start time, but he waved her through without comment. Rosa found Marcus already in his office, still wearing yesterday's clothes, surrounded by printed emails and legal documents. I don't think I slept at all, he admitted as she entered. Read this. He handed her a printed copy of Jennifer Zhao's email, and Rosa felt her breath catch as she read the opening lines. The response was written in both English and Mandarin, a subtle but significant gesture that acknowledged the cultural bridge Rosa and Marcus had attempted to build. Mr. Chen, the email began, your letter was a surprise in the best possible way. In 20 years of international business, I have rarely received correspondence that demonstrated such genuine understanding of the cultural missteps that led to our previous difficulties. Your willingness to acknowledge these issues and seek guidance shows a level of wisdom and humility that gives me hope for future collaboration." Rosa looked up at Marcus, who was watching her with an expression of barely contained anticipation. "Keep reading," he said. Jennifer's email continued with specific observations about their letter that demonstrated she had read it carefully and appreciated its cultural sensitivity. She noted the way they had prioritized relationship building over immediate business opportunities, the respect they had shown for Chinese business traditions, and the genuine commitment to learning from past mistakes. However, the email continued, and Rosa felt her stomach tighten. "Words alone cannot rebuild the trust that was damaged during our previous negotiations. If quantum dynamics is truly committed to approaching Chinese partnerships with the cultural understanding your letter suggests, I would be interested in seeing this commitment demonstrated through action." "What kind of action?" Rosa asked, though she suspected she already knew. Marcus pointed to the next paragraph. "She wants to meet with us. Not our lawyers or consultants or business development teams. She wants to meet with the people who wrote that letter, who understand the cultural principles we discussed." Rosa's mouth went dry. "She wants to meet with you." "She wants to meet with us," Marcus corrected. "She specifically mentions wanting to discuss cultural integration strategies with the team member who clearly understands Chinese business relationships. She knows someone helped me write that letter, Rosa, and she wants to meet whoever that person is." The implications hit Rosa like a physical blow. Jennifer Zhao, one of the most powerful businesswomen in Shanghai, wanted to meet with her. Not Marcus's housekeeper, but the cultural expert who had helped craft their response. "Marcus, I can't meet with Jennifer Zhao," Rosa said, panic creeping into her voice. "I'm not qualified to represent your company in international negotiations. I'm 3 years out of graduate school, and I've been cleaning houses ever since. You're the most qualified person I've met to handle these cultural challenges," Marcus replied firmly. "Every consulting firm I've hired has failed to understand what you explained to me in 2 hours. You identified the exact problems that were sabotaging our negotiations, and you helped me craft a response that got Jennifer Zhao's attention for the first time in 8 months." Rosa paced to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens while her mind raced. What exactly is she proposing? She wants us to come to Shanghai. Not for formal business meetings, but for what she calls cultural dialogue sessions. She wants to understand our commitment to building relationships within Chinese business frameworks, and she wants to see if we can develop a partnership model that respects both American efficiency and Chinese relationship priorities. When? Next week. Rosa felt the room tilt around her. Next week? I know it's sudden, but she's testing our commitment. If we hesitate or ask for delays, it will signal that we're not serious about changing our approach. Rosa stared at Marcus, trying to process what he was asking. A week ago, she had been invisible in his house, dusting furniture and emptying wastebaskets. Now he was asking her to accompany him to Shanghai to negotiate with one of China's most influential business leaders. "Marcus, I don't have business clothes for international meetings. I don't have a passport that's current for business travel. I don't have any of the credentials or documentation that would make me credible in these discussions." "All of that can be handled," Marcus said. "Rosa, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity or some kind of rescue mission. This is business. You have expertise that my company desperately needs, and I'm willing to compensate you accordingly." The word compensate made Rosa's stomach flutter with possibility and terror. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus pulled out a folder that Rosa hadn't noticed before. "I spent the weekend talking to my legal team and my board of directors. I want to offer you a position as Director of Cultural Integration for Quantum Dynamics International Expansion Division." Rosa's knees went weak. She sat heavily in the chair across from Marcus's desk. "The position would involve exactly what you've been helping me with. Cultural analysis, relationship strategy, communication frameworks for international partnerships. The starting salary would be $180,000 annually, plus equity options and a relocation allowance." Rosa stared at him, unable to process the numbers he was quoting. $180,000 was more than she had earned in the past 4 years combined. Plus, Marcus continued, the company would fund completion of your Georgetown degree. You could finish your thesis remotely while working for us, and we would cover all tuition and expenses. Why? Rosa whispered. Why would you take this kind of risk on someone with no corporate experience? Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Because every expert I've hired has failed to solve problems that you identified immediately. Because you understand cultural dynamics that are crucial to our international success. And because I believe that talent and expertise matter more than traditional credentials. Rosa felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The offer was beyond anything she had imagined possible. There's one condition, Marcus added, and Rosa's heart sank. You have to come with me to Shanghai next week. Not as my housekeeper, but as Quantum Dynamics Director of Cultural Integration. You have to be willing to represent this company in negotiations with Jennifer Zhao and whoever else she brings to the table. The weight of the decision pressed down on Rosa like a physical force. Everything she had ever wanted was being offered to her, but it required her to step into a role that terrified her. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tomorrow morning, Marcus replied. Our flight leaves Tuesday if we're going to make Jennifer's proposed meeting schedule. Rosa spent Monday in a state of emotional and mental chaos. She called in sick to her other cleaning jobs and spent the day walking through Golden Gate Park, trying to process the magnitude of the decision she faced. She called her mother in Bogota, speaking in rapid Spanish about the opportunity and her fears. Her mother listened patiently, then offered the kind of wisdom that only came from raising a daughter through impossible circumstances. Mija, her mother said gently, you have spent 3 years punishing yourself for leaving school to help our family. But that sacrifice taught you things no classroom could have shown you. You learned resilience, humility, and the value of honest work. Those lessons will serve you better in business than any textbook knowledge. But what if I fail? Rosa asked. What if I embarrass myself in front of Jennifer Zhao? What if I prove that I'm not qualified for this kind of responsibility? And what if you succeed? Her mother countered. What if you discover that you're even more capable than you believed? Rosa, you cannot spend your life afraid of your own potential. That evening, Rosa sat in her small apartment and wrote out lists of pros and cons, analyzed the risks and opportunities, and tried to approach the decision with the same academic rigor she had once applied to international relations case studies. But ultimately, the decision came down to something simpler than analysis. It came down to the choice between safety and possibility, between accepting her current limitations and daring to believe she could transcend them. Rosa called Marcus at 10 o'clock that night. I'll take the position, she said without preamble. And I'll come with you to Shanghai. The next morning arrived with the surreal quality of a dream. Rosa found herself in the back of a black sedan, wearing a navy blue business suit that had been delivered to her apartment the night before, heading towards San Francisco International Airport with Marcus Chen. They sat in the first-class cabin of a United Airlines flight to Shanghai, and Rosa tried not to think about the fact that her airplane seat cost more than she usually earned in a month. Marcus spent the 14-hour flight briefing her on quantum dynamics technology, their competitive positioning in the global market, and the specific challenges they faced in Asian expansion. Rosa absorbed the information with the same intensity she had once brought to her graduate studies, taking notes and asking questions that surprised Marcus with their sophistication. She found that her academic training in international business translated directly to real-world corporate challenges, and her confidence grew with each hour of preparation. Tell me about Jennifer Zhao personally, Rosa said as they flew over the Pacific. Not just her business background, but her communication style, her priorities, her approach to relationship building. Marcus pulled out his tablet and showed Rosa articles and interviews featuring Jennifer Zhao. Together, they analyzed her public statements, her business philosophy, and the cultural values she emphasized in her leadership approach. She talks a lot about sustainable partnerships and mutual respect, Rosa observed. Those aren't just corporate buzzwords in Chinese business culture. She's signaling that she prioritizes long-term relationship building over short-term profit maximization. Which means we need to approach our discussions with her as the beginning of a decades-long business relationship, not as a single negotiation with a defined endpoint. They landed in Shanghai on Wednesday evening, and Rosa felt her breath catch as they descended through the clouds toward Pudong International Airport. The city spread below them like a constellation of lights, modern skyscrapers rising beside traditional architecture in a visual representation of China's blend of innovation and tradition. Jennifer Zhao had arranged for them to stay at the Park Hyatt Shanghai, a luxury hotel in the financial district that occupied the top floors of the Shanghai World Financial Center. Rosa's room on the 85th floor offered a panoramic view of the city that made her feel like she was floating among the stars. Their first meeting with Jennifer was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at Chen International's headquarters, a gleaming tower in Lujiazui that housed one of China's most successful technology companies. Rosa spent Thursday morning in her hotel room, reviewing her notes and practicing key phrases in Mandarin, preparing for what felt like the most important conversation of her life. "Remember," Marcus said as their taxi approached Chen International's building, "you're not here as my translator or my cultural consultant. You're here as my partner. Jennifer wants to meet the person who understands Chinese business relationships, and that's you." The Chen International offices were a study in understated elegance, blending modern technology with traditional Chinese design elements. Cherrywood panels lined the walls, and subtle jade accents complemented the contemporary furniture. It was a space that honored Chinese heritage while embracing global business standards. Jennifer Zhao met them in a conference room on the 40th floor, accompanied by two senior executives from her company. She was smaller than Rosa had expected, but her presence filled the room with quiet authority. She wore a tailored black suit and spoke with the confident precision of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. "Mr. Chen," Jennifer said, shaking Marcus's hand with a warm smile. "Thank you for making the journey to Shanghai. And you must be the cultural integration specialist who helped craft that remarkable letter." Rosa felt her heart hammering as Jennifer turned to her with genuine interest and respect. "I'm Rosa Martinez," she said, offering her hand and speaking in Mandarin. "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Zhao. I've followed your work in international business development for years." Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly, and she responded in fluent Mandarin, testing Rosa's language skills with a complex question about current trends in cross-cultural business communication. Rosa answered smoothly, and she could see Jennifer's expression shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. They spoke in Mandarin for several minutes, discussing academic theories and practical applications of cultural integration and international partnerships. "Your Mandarin is excellent," Jennifer said, switching back to English so Marcus could follow the conversation. "Where did you study Chinese business culture?" "Georgetown University," Rosa replied. "I specialized in international relations with a focus on cross-cultural communication and technology partnerships." "In your practical experience in Chinese business environments?" Rosa felt a moment of panic. This was the question she had been dreading, the one that would expose her lack of real-world corporate experience. "This is my first direct experience with Chinese business negotiations," she admitted honestly. "But I've spent 3 years observing American companies struggle with exactly the cultural challenges that quantum dynamics has been facing. I believe that sometimes an outside perspective can identify solutions that industry insiders miss." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Honesty is the foundation of trust. Thank you for being direct with me." The conversation that followed was unlike any business meeting Rosa had ever imagined. Instead of focusing on contracts and financial terms, they spent 2 hours discussing cultural values, communication styles, and relationship-building strategies. Jennifer explained her company's approach to international partnerships, emphasizing the importance of personal relationships and long-term thinking. She described the specific cultural missteps that had damaged her confidence in quantum dynamics during their previous negotiations, and she outlined the kind of partnership framework that would be necessary for future collaboration. Rosa found herself translating not just between languages but between cultural worldviews, helping Marcus understand concepts that had no direct equivalent in American business culture while helping Jennifer see how quantum dynamics technology could serve Chinese market needs. The quantum encryption technology has enormous potential for Chinese financial institutions, Jennifer said. But implementing Western technology in Chinese banking systems requires more than technical compatibility. It requires cultural integration, ongoing relationship management, and commitment to adapting the technology for Chinese regulatory requirements. We're absolutely committed to that kind of partnership approach, Marcus said, looking at Rosa for support. What Mr. Chen means, Rosa added, speaking to Jennifer in a mixture of English and Mandarin, is that quantum dynamics recognizes that successful technology partnerships require ongoing cultural collaboration, not just one-time licensing agreements. We want to build relationships that evolve and adapt over time, with Chinese partners as true collaborators rather than simply customers. Jennifer smiled for the first time since the meeting began. That is exactly the kind of partnership philosophy that interests me. The meeting lasted 4 hours, far longer than anyone had scheduled. By the end, they had outlined a preliminary framework for collaboration that went far beyond anything Marcus had imagined possible. Instead of a simple licensing deal, Jennifer proposed a joint venture that would establish a Chinese subsidiary of Quantum Dynamics, with Chinese executives in key leadership roles and decision-making authority adapted to local business practices. The financial terms were more complex but potentially more profitable than anything Marcus's previous consulting firms had recommended. This partnership model requires a long-term commitment from both companies, Jennifer explained. Success will depend on ongoing cultural integration and relationship management. Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to relocate to Shanghai for 6 months each year to oversee this cultural integration process? Rosa felt the world tilt around her. Jennifer Zhao was asking her to move to Shanghai, to take on responsibilities that would make her one of the key figures in a multimillion-dollar international partnership. I would be honored to take on that responsibility, Rosa replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. As they concluded the meeting, Jennifer handed Rosa her personal business card, a gesture of respect that Rosa understood carried significant meaning in Chinese business culture. I look forward to working with you, Ms. Martinez, Jennifer said. Your understanding of cultural dynamics will be crucial to our success. That evening, Marcus and Rosa sat in the hotel's rooftop bar, looking out at the glittering Shanghai skyline while processing what had happened. Do you realize what just occurred? Marcus asked, shaking his head in amazement. We went from a failed partnership to a joint venture proposal in a single meeting. Jennifer Zhao went from refusing to work with us to asking you to relocate to Shanghai. Rosa stared out at the city lights, still trying to believe that this was really her life now. 6 months ago, I was cleaning your bathroom. Now Jennifer Zhao wants me to oversee cultural integration for a multimillion-dollar partnership. 6 months ago, I was about to give up on international expansion entirely, Marcus replied. Now we're looking at potentially the most important partnership in our company's history. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both of them processing the magnitude of the changes that had occurred over the past week. Rosa, Marcus said finally, I need to ask you something important. She turned to look at him, noting the serious expression on his face. When we get back to California, my board of directors is going to want to understand exactly how this partnership came together. They're going to want to know how my housekeeper became the key architect of our Chinese expansion strategy. Rosa felt a flutter of anxiety. What are you going to tell them? I'm going to tell them the truth, Marcus said. That talent and expertise can't be measured by job titles or corporate credentials. That sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected sources. And that Rosa Martinez is the best cultural integration specialist I've ever worked with, regardless of how I found her. Rosa felt tears threatening again. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for having the courage to speak up, Marcus replied. Most people would have stayed silent and safe. You chose to risk everything for the possibility of something better. They flew back to California the next day, but Rosa knew she would be returning to Shanghai soon. The joint venture with Chen International would require months of cultural integration work, relationship building, and ongoing collaboration between American and Chinese teams. More importantly, Rosa had discovered something about herself that she had forgotten during her years of invisible domestic work. She was capable of far more than she had believed, and the world was ready to recognize her talents if she was brave enough to claim them. The girl who had cleaned Marcus Chen's house was gone forever, replaced by a woman who could navigate international boardrooms with the same skill she had once brought to academic conferences. Rosa Martinez had found her voice, and the world was listening. 6 months had passed since Rosa Martinez walked into Marcus Chen's office and changed both their lives forever. The Quantum Dynamics boardroom on the 32nd floor of their Silicon Valley headquarters buzzed with anticipation as executives gathered for the quarterly review meeting. Rosa sat at the conference table in a charcoal gray suit, her presentation materials organized neatly before her, no longer the invisible woman who once cleaned these very floors. The joint venture with Chen International had exceeded every projection. Revenue from the Chinese market had grown by 47% in just half a year, and 3 additional Chinese corporations had approached Quantum Dynamics about potential partnerships. The success wasn't just measured in profit margins and market share. It was evident in the relationships Rosa had carefully cultivated, the cultural bridges she had built, and the respect Quantum Dynamics had earned in Asian business circles. Marcus entered the boardroom with David Hamilton, whose skepticism about Rosa's appointment had gradually transformed into grudging respect as the Chinese partnerships flourished. The board members took their seats, and Marcus opened the meeting with a smile that Rosa had come to recognize as genuine pride. "Before we dive into the quarterly reports, I want to acknowledge the person who made all of this possible," Marcus said, gesturing toward Rosa. 6 months ago, our international expansion strategy was failing. Today, we're looking at partnerships that will define our company's trajectory for the next decade. Rosa, would you walk us through the cultural integration framework that made this transformation happen? Rosa stood and moved to the presentation screen, her confidence a stark contrast to the woman who had once hidden her expertise behind a cleaning cart. She spoke about relationship-building protocols, cultural adaptation strategies, and the specific communication frameworks that had turned failed negotiations into successful partnerships. The board members listened with rapt attention as Rosa explained how understanding hierarchy dynamics in Chinese corporations had allowed them to structure their joint venture in ways that honored both American efficiency and Chinese business traditions. She outlined the ongoing cultural training programs she had developed for Quantum Dynamics employees working with international partners, and she shared feedback from Jennifer Zhao about the partnership's success. The key insight, Rosa concluded, is that international expansion isn't just about adapting products for foreign markets. It's about adapting ourselves to understand and respect different cultural frameworks for conducting business. When we stopped trying to impose American business practices on Chinese partners and started learning their language of relationship and respect, everything changed. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Reynolds who had initially voted against Rosa's appointment, raised her hand. "Ms. Martinez, I'll be honest. When Marcus first proposed creating this position for you, I thought it was impulsive and risky. I owe you an apology. Your work has been nothing short of transformational for this company." Rosa felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. I understand your initial concerns were reasonable. I didn't have traditional corporate credentials. But I hope this demonstrates that expertise can come from unexpected places, and that investing in unconventional talent can yield extraordinary returns." After the meeting concluded, Marcus walked with Rosa back to her office, a space that still felt surreal to her despite 6 months of occupancy. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the valley, and her desk held a photo of her parents visiting from Colombia just last month, their faces beaming with pride as they toured the Quantum Dynamics campus. "I got a call from Georgetown this morning," Marcus said as they entered her office. "Your thesis advisor wants to talk to you about completing your degree. Apparently, word has spread in academic circles about the work you're doing here, and they're interested in having you present your practical findings on cross-cultural business integration." Rosa sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the circularity of her journey. 3 years ago, she had left Georgetown in shame and desperation. Now they were inviting her back as an expert whose real-world experience had validated her academic theories. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his expression turning serious. "Jennifer Zhao called me yesterday with an interesting proposal. Chen International wants to establish a cultural integration consulting division, and they want you to lead it. You'd be based in Shanghai full-time, working with Chinese and American companies on both sides. The salary they're offering is substantial." Rosa's breath caught. "She wants me to leave quantum dynamics. She wants to give you an opportunity to expand the work you've been doing here into a full consulting practice. You'd be helping multiple companies navigate international partnerships, not just ours. It's a chance to turn what you've built here into something even bigger." Rosa walked to the window, looking out at the landscape that had become familiar over the past 6 months. Leaving quantum dynamics felt like abandoning the place where she had been reborn, where Marcus had taken a chance on her when no one else would have. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Marcus joined her at the window. "I think you should do whatever allows you to have the greatest impact. Rosa, you changed my company and my understanding of international business. But you're capable of changing entire industries if you want to. Jennifer Zhao sees that potential, and she's offering you a platform to realize it. I don't want to seem ungrateful after everything you've done for me." "Gratitude doesn't mean limiting yourself," Marcus replied. "You've more than repaid any faith I had in you. Now it's time to think about what you want your career to look like, not what you owe anyone else." That evening, Rosa sat in her apartment, significantly nicer than the cramped space she had occupied 6 months earlier but still modest by Silicon Valley standards. She called her mother in Bogota, needing the wisdom that had guided her through every major decision in her life. "Mija, do you remember what I told you before you went to Shanghai?" her mother asked. "I said you couldn't spend your life afraid of your own potential. The same truth applies now. This new opportunity scares you because it's even bigger than what you've already achieved. But fear of success is still fear. What if I fail? What if I can't replicate what worked at quantum dynamics across multiple companies? And what if you succeed beyond anything you've imagined?" her mother countered. "Rosa, you have spent your life exceeding expectations. The girl who learned 6 languages, the student who excelled at Georgetown, the housekeeper who transformed a failing international expansion. Each time, you proved you were capable of more than anyone believed. Why would this be different?" Rosa spent the weekend wrestling with her decision, analyzing pros and cons with the same academic rigor she brought to cultural integration strategies. But ultimately, the choice came down to a simple question: did she want to play it safe or continue pushing the boundaries of what she thought possible? Monday morning, Rosa walked into Marcus's office with her decision. "I'm going to take Jennifer's offer," she said. "But I have one condition. I want quantum dynamics to be my first client. I'll establish the consulting practice in Shanghai, but I want to continue working with your company as we expand into other Asian markets. You took a chance on me when I was invisible, and I won't forget that." Marcus smiled broadly. "I wouldn't want it any other way. Besides, you're the only person who's managed to make international negotiations feel less terrifying. I'm not letting you go completely." The transition happened quickly. Within a month, Rosa had relocated to Shanghai, where Chen International helped her establish Martinez Global Integration Consulting. Her first office was modest, just 3 rooms in a modern building near Lujiazui, but it represented something far more valuable than square footage. It represented autonomy, expertise, and the full realization of potential that had been dormant for years. Jennifer Zhao became not just a client but a mentor, introducing Rosa to executives across China's technology sector and vouching for her expertise. The referrals came quickly. A Beijing-based artificial intelligence company struggling to partner with American universities. A European pharmaceutical firm trying to navigate Chinese regulatory requirements. An American entertainment company attempting to understand Chinese consumer preferences. Each project presented unique challenges, but Rosa discovered that the fundamental principles remained constant. Success in cross-cultural business relationships required humility, genuine respect for different value systems, and the willingness to invest time in understanding rather than imposing solutions. Within a year, Martinez Global Integration Consulting had expanded to 12 employees, a mixture of Chinese and international staff who shared Rosa's passion for building bridges between cultures. Her client list included Fortune 500 companies and emerging startups, all seeking the cultural fluency that had become Rosa's signature expertise. The media began noticing her work. Business journals published articles about her unconventional path from domestic worker to international business consultant. She was invited to speak at conferences about cross-cultural communication, and Georgetown reached out again, this time offering her an adjunct professor position teaching international business culture. 2 years after that pivotal conversation in Marcus Chen's office, Rosa stood on a stage at a technology conference in Singapore, addressing an audience of 2,000 business leaders about cultural intelligence and global partnerships. She looked out at the sea of faces, representing dozens of countries and countless corporate interests, and felt a profound sense of rightness. "Many of you know my story," Rosa said, her voice steady and confident. "You know I worked as a housekeeper while holding an incomplete graduate degree in international relations. Some people see that story as inspirational, a tale of hidden talent finally recognized. But I want to offer a different perspective." She paused, letting the audience settle into attentive silence. "I wasn't hidden talent waiting to be discovered. I was visible the entire time. I cleaned offices where important business decisions were made. I listened to international phone calls and conference meetings. I observed corporate cultures from a vantage point most executives never see. The problem wasn't that I was invisible. The problem was that people had decided certain jobs and certain roles meant certain people weren't worth seeing." The audience stirred with recognition and discomfort. "How many talented people work in your organizations right now, performing jobs that seem mundane, while possessing expertise and insights that could transform your business? How many opportunities are you missing because you've decided that job titles define capabilities?" Rosa continued her presentation, sharing case studies and practical frameworks, but her opening message resonated through everything that followed. Talent existed everywhere, but recognition required intentional effort to see beyond superficial markers of success. After the conference, Rosa met Marcus for dinner at a restaurant overlooking Marina Bay. He had flown in specifically to hear her speak, maintaining the friendship that had begun in such unusual circumstances. "You've come a long way from dusting my bookshelves," he said with a warm smile. "We both have," Rosa replied. "You've learned to see talent in unexpected places. That's a skill more valuable than any technology patent. Do you ever miss the simplicity of your old life? Before all this complexity and responsibility?" Rosa considered the question carefully. "I miss the invisibility sometimes. There was a strange comfort in being overlooked, in having low expectations to meet. But I don't miss the waste of it. I don't miss knowing I had skills and knowledge that could help people but choosing silence over risk." Marcus raised his glass. "To choosing risk over silence." Rosa clinked her glass against his. "To seeing people for who they really are, not what we assume they must be." 3 years after speaking up in Marcus Chen's office, Rosa Martinez had become one of the most sought-after cultural integration consultants in Asia. Her company had expanded to offices in Shanghai, Singapore, and San Francisco, employing 32 people across 3 continents. She had completed her Georgetown degree, presenting a thesis that drew on her practical consulting work and earned distinction from her academic committee. But more importantly, Rosa had discovered something fundamental about human potential. Talent wasn't rare. It was everywhere, in people performing jobs that society deemed insignificant, in individuals whose circumstances had forced them to set aside their dreams, in workers who had learned to make themselves invisible to survive. The real scarcity wasn't talent. It was the willingness to recognize it in unexpected places and the courage to take chances on people whose worth wasn't immediately obvious. Rosa thought about this often as she interviewed candidates for her growing consulting firm. She hired a former taxi driver who spoke 5 languages and understood urban transportation systems better than any city planner. She brought on a restaurant server who had encyclopedic knowledge of regional cultural differences in business etiquette. She recruited a retired teacher whose decades of explaining complex concepts to diverse audiences made her an exceptional corporate trainer. Each hire reinforced Rosa's belief that conventional credentials were poor predictors of actual capability. The best talent often came from people who had developed skills outside traditional corporate pathways, who understood the world from perspectives that MBA programs never taught. Chen had learned the same lesson. Quantum Dynamics had established a talent development program that actively recruited from unconventional sources, offering opportunities to people whose expertise didn't fit standard corporate profiles. The program had become one of the company's competitive advantages, bringing in perspectives and capabilities that traditional hiring practices would have overlooked. Rosa's story became a case study in business schools, an example of how rigid credentialism and narrow definitions of expertise could blind organizations to extraordinary talent. But Rosa herself remained remarkably grounded despite her success, never forgetting the years she spent being invisible, the humiliation of being dismissed based on her job rather than her capabilities. She established a scholarship fund for domestic workers pursuing higher education, understanding that financial barriers often trap talented people in circumstances that prevented them from fully developing their potential. She mentored young professionals from working-class backgrounds, helping them navigate corporate environments where they felt like outsiders. And she never stopped being grateful to Chen for having the wisdom to look beyond her uniform and see the person underneath. Their friendship had evolved into a genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and shared understanding that value came in unexpected packages. Standing in her Shanghai office 5 years after that fateful conversation, Rosa looked out at the city that had become her second home. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the dusty streets of Bogotá to the prestigious halls of Georgetown, from the invisible existence of domestic work to the recognition of international business consulting. The path had been neither straight nor predictable, marked by tragedy and triumph, by years of obscurity followed by sudden visibility. But every step had been necessary, every experience had contributed to the person she had become. Rosa Martinez was no longer the invisible woman who cleaned other people's homes. But she would never forget what that invisibility had taught her about human nature, about the arbitrary ways society assigned value to different kinds of work, about the vast reservoirs of untapped potential that existed in people whose circumstances had forced them to the margins. Her life was proof that transformation was possible, that one moment of courage could unlock futures that seemed impossible. But more importantly, it was proof that talent and worth existed independently of recognition, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to see it and generous enough to create opportunities for it to flourish. The sun set over Shanghai's glittering skyline, casting long shadows across Rosa's office. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new cultural challenges, new opportunities to build bridges between worlds. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply appreciate how far she had traveled and how many lives she had touched along the way. Rosa Martinez had found her voice, and the world would never stop listening. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.